Tess moved through the dim light with the quiet precision of someone who knew every inch of the flight line. The sky above the base was the color of cold steel. The first hints of morning still locked beyond the horizon. In her hand, a coffee cup cooled in the light breeze. The steam long gone, but the comfort still there. Beyond the hangars, the faint sweep of the radar turned in its steady rhythm, each pass carrying the low hum that everyone in the ops room could hear, but rarely acknowledged. The air carried the scent of fuel and damp tarmac, the residue of a night that had not yet surrendered to daylight. A generator droned somewhere near the maintenance sheds, steady and unhurried, while bootsteps echoed softly on the concrete. The base felt still, but it was not the stillness of inaction. It was the readiness of a place where movement could happen in seconds, where a quiet conversation could stop mid-sentence at the sound of a call sign over the intercom. She paused beside her fighter, its canopy closed, surface slick with a faint sheen of dew. The aircraft sat in the shadows like a patient predator, silent, but entirely awake. Tess set the coffee cup on the edge of the intake and ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool skin beneath her fingers. Somewhere in the background, a muffled voice read coordinates into a headset, the sound blending with the radar's heartbeat sweep. The order came without fanfare. A clipped transmission carried from the ops room, the words clear and unadorned. Unidentified formation, high speed, climbing altitude, approaching the edge of their airspace. Tess did not need to look toward the source. The message carried all the weight it needed. The coffee was left behind as she stepped onto the ladder, the shift from stillness to motion immediate but without waste. Her movements inside the cockpit were practiced and deliberate. Harness straps slid over her shoulders and clicked into place, each pull snugging them with a measured firmness. Her helmet rested on the canopy rail for now, close enough to reach without breaking her flow. The glass around her reflected faint points of light from the instrument panel, green and amber glows marking each system as she brought them online. Outside, the sky remained unchanged, that cold steel backdrop still holding back the dawn. She checked fuel, pressure, and control surfaces, each confirmation flowing into the next. The canopy lowered with a slow, hydraulic sigh, sealing her inside with the quiet hum of electronics and the faint hiss of oxygen. Through the glass, the base's lights shimmered against the dark pavement, their edges blurred by a thin layer of moisture in the air. The low whine of the engines rose behind her, building in a steady climb toward readiness. Ground crew figures moved at the edges of her vision, small nods exchanged without words. They had done this before, many times, but the knowledge that she was the only bird ready to launch now carried its own weight. Others would follow, but for the first minutes of this intercept, the sky would be hers, alone. That reality sharpened her focus more than any sense of danger. The radar ping came through her headset, soft but distinct, a pulse that settled into rhythm with her breathing. It was the heartbeat of the mission, a reminder that somewhere beyond the horizon, another set of pilots was making their own calculations. Tess adjusted her gloves, flexing her hands once before wrapping them around the throttle and stick. The checklists had been completed without rush, but now the pace began to change. Clearance to taxi arrived as a firm voice in her ear, and she released the brakes, the aircraft rolling forward with a smooth, heavy glide. Pavement lines passed beneath her nose in even intervals, each one pulling her closer to the runway threshold. The engines were alive now, the deep, contained growl of restrained power ready to be released. She glanced once toward the eastern horizon, where a pale suggestion of light hinted at the sun's rise. At the hold line, she brought the throttles forward, the sound swelling and filling the cockpit. The vibrations pressed into her seat, through her boots, into her bones. The helmet still sat above her head, not yet needed, the last touch of casual readiness before the full weight of the mission took over. Ground control cleared her for immediate departure. She eased the throttles forward again, then passed the detent, and the afterburners lit with a sharp surge. The aircraft leapt forward, the runway lights streaking into elongated blurs along either side. Her coffee cup and the quiet morning were already part of another world. Left behind with the radar hum and the muted pre-dawn air. Ahead lay only speed, altitude, and the edge of the sky where sovereignty was measured in presence. Tess brought the nose up into the thin layer of morning mist, the runway and base vanishing behind her in seconds. The world became pale and weightless, edges blurred by the moisture she sliced through. Beyond the glass, the first rim of sunlight brushed the horizon, turning the upper edges of the mist to soft gold. The canopy caught that light and sent it back in her direction, a fleeting reflection that turned the cockpit into a mirror. Her gloved hand steadied on the throttle, the aircraft responding with a smooth and obedient climb. The engine note shifted, deepening in pitch as altitude increased, the faint background rumble giving way to a sharper resonance. She felt it in the pedals, in the subtle pressure changes that pressed against her ears. Inside, every gauge seemed sharper, the green and amber displays bright against the dim blue of the sky beyond. The mist broke apart suddenly, releasing her into a vault of open air. The shift was instant. The sun was no longer a distant glow, but a blinding edge above the horizon, throwing white light across the canopy. She lowered her gaze to keep the glare out of her eyes, letting instruments carry the moment until her vision adjusted. The sky ahead was vast and without cloud, a long stretch of blue that belonged to speed. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the controls grow heavier as the aircraft approached the edge of transonic flight. Air resistance thickened around the wings, the sound inside the cockpit narrowing into a taut, high-pitched tremor. The stick responded with a firmness that demanded strength and precision. Every movement had to be exact, every adjustment measured. This was the narrow margin where control and momentum wrestled for dominance. A thin halo shimmered just ahead of the nose, faint at first, then sharpening into a vapor cone as the humid air condensed in the shock of her passage. It hung for a fraction of a second before breaking apart into misty streamers swept behind her. She had crossed into the realm where sound and speed touched, where the atmosphere itself marked her passage with a visible sign. The radar tone in her headset deepened, a slow and steady pulse that matched the beat of her own breathing. She glanced at the scope. The contact was still distant but closing, a faint shape marked only by numbers and symbols. Somewhere ahead, above or below the line of her sight, was another pilot watching his own scope, seeing her in return. The knowledge made her grip the stick a little tighter. Then she caught it. A faint gleam far ahead, a shard of reflected light against the endless blue. It was too brief to read shape or color, but it was the first tangible link between the blips on her display and the reality of an approaching aircraft. The sky itself had revealed them, if only for a heartbeat. She kept her eyes there, knowing the light would come again as their angles shifted. Off her right, a lone hawk wheeled in the open air, wings steady as it rode the currents. For a moment it seemed to hold its course toward her, then with a single bank it turned away, folding back toward the earth below. The gesture, unknowing yet symbolic, felt like a small acknowledgement. She had entered its space, and it had yielded. Tess carried that image forward, letting it become a quiet reminder of why she was here. The climb continued, her altitude marker ticking upward in smooth increments. Air pressure shifted again, settling into a comfortable steadiness. She remembered the first time she had gone supersonic, years ago in training. Back then, the purpose had been to master the feel of it, to understand what it did to the aircraft and to her own senses. Now it was different. This was not a lesson. It was a declaration. Below her, the vapor trail she had carved in the climb stretched out like a white thread against the darker blue, a mark that pointed straight toward the border. Ahead, the sky seemed to narrow, distance folding under the pull of closing speed. Her mind counted not just miles but moments, measuring the time until the contact in her scope would become a full visual presence. The glare came back in sudden flashes as the sun climbed higher, each burst briefly turning the canopy into glass too bright to see through. She adjusted with small shifts in angle, letting her instruments carry her when the view ahead became a wall of white light. This was the part where trust in the aircraft and its systems mattered as much as instinct. The enemy could use the same glare to hide their movements, but the numbers on her display would not lie. Her breathing stayed slow, deliberate. The urge to push harder, to reach maximum closure as fast as possible, was tempered by the knowledge that control at speed mattered more than raw acceleration. The fighter had more to give, but it would give it best when she asked for it in sequence, not in a single burst. Tess eased the throttles again, letting the climb settle into a balance between altitude and speed. The radar tone came again, deeper now, the interval shortening. They were closing. The glint ahead became a steady flicker, the enemy's motion starting to reveal itself in the shift of light. The first stage was complete. She was no longer bound to the ground or the slow, deliberate pace of preparation. Now the sky was both ally and opponent, offering her speed while testing her control. The rest would be decided in the space where blue met blue, and the first sight became the first move. Tess leveled her climb just long enough to catch the full picture of the sky ahead. 4 fighters held a loose diamond formation, their lines clean and deliberate as they paralleled the border. They were distant, but solid enough in her HUD to be more than symbols now. The shape of their wings cutting against the haze. Her eyes narrowed, gauging their height and bearing before shifting her attention to the climb indicator. She eased the nose higher and fed more power into the engines, drawing herself above their altitude. Altitude was a statement, and she intended it to be seen. The extra height gave her both an advantage and an unmistakable signal that she was here to challenge their presence. From this angle, her path would be visible in their canopies, a long white arc of vapor that pointed directly toward them. The sun caught the glass at the wrong moment and erased them completely. One instant they were solid in her display. The next, they were gone in a sheet of blinding gold. She did not hesitate or search the empty light. Her gaze dropped to the instruments, reading closure rate and bearing changes, trusting the data over the absence of a view. The numbers told her they had not altered course yet. Ground control's voice came in steady and clear. Rules of engagement were confirmed. No weapons release unless they acted first. The words were familiar, part of every Intercept brief, but they carried weight now. It meant the contest ahead was one of presence and nerve, not firepower. Tess acknowledged the call with a short confirmation and returned her attention to the scope. The airspeed needle pressed near the red line. Her fighter's frame hummed with the sustained pressure, every panel and rivet locked in perfect alignment against the strain. She held it there, pushing as far as she could without tipping over into wasteful speed. Her vapor trail stretched behind in a straight, unbroken line, angled toward the meeting point ahead. Through the HUD, the enemy formation resolved again. The sun had shifted enough to release them from its glare. She saw the diamond begin a slow weave, side to side, an almost casual motion that did not alter their forward track. It was a test, meant to judge how closely she would match them, whether she would commit to the intercept. She kept her breathing even, hands light on the controls. Matching their weave too soon would give them the satisfaction of dictating her movement. Instead, she held her own line, letting the converging distance close naturally. The radar tone in her headset ticked down in intervals, each one shortening with her approach. The HUD locked onto the lead aircraft with a green bracket. It stayed centered no matter how they shifted. Her intercept vector clean and efficient. The formation's vapor trails began to bend in her direction, thin white curves that now intersected the blue at sharp angles with her own. It was like watching two signatures being written toward the same point. She adjusted her altitude by small increments, climbing another few hundred feet. The change was slight, but enough to force the lead pilot to see her against the sun. The move was deliberate. calculated to draw their eyes to the threat above. She knew that in their own HUDs, her aircraft would now be a solid target, undeniable in both position and intent. The sun returned to the edges of her vision, throwing light across the canopy in flashes. It made the enemy flicker in and out again, a game of appearance and disappearance that tested patience. Tess relied on the steady sweep of her instruments, marking every minor adjustment they made. The visual cues might shift, but the math of their paths did not. A subtle tightening of her grip on the stick marked her growing readiness. They were still outside the range where maneuvering would force a break. But the moment was coming. Her jet remained level and steady, closing the gap with measured confidence. Every decision here was about posture as much as performance. The air between them thinned in the way it always did before an intercept. Distances that had been marked in miles now felt like a series of held breaths. The sun caught the enemy's canopies again, but now the glare was fleeting, breaking over the shapes of their fuselages. The lead kept his nose pointed forward, but she could feel the formation's awareness shift toward her. Her vapor trail was now visible in their rear views, a long, narrowing blade across the morning sky. Theirs bent subtly toward her position, the patterns twisting as they adjusted. Above them, the pale contrail of a commercial jet drifted east, far removed from the silent contest below. She held her course, neither slowing nor accelerating beyond the margin she had chosen. The tone in her headset smoothed into a constant rhythm, each pulse a countdown toward the instant when presence would become confrontation. Victory here was not in the pass itself, but in holding the line long enough to make the other side blink first. Tess kept her eyes on the lead, her breathing even, the red line steady. The next move would be theirs to make. The closure rate climbed past Mach 1.5. The air around the fuselage tightening into an invisible wall she would pierce in seconds. The radar tone in her headset sharpened to a rapid, steady pulse, each note marking the enemy's approach in perfect increments. Through the HUD, the lead fighter's silhouette resolved in crisp detail. Wings straight, nose pointed directly toward her. Distance compressed into pure anticipation, the kind that leaves no space for thought beyond the next breath. Her grip was firm on the stick, the throttle eased forward just enough to keep the needle steady near maximum safe speed. Every vibration in the airframe carried up through her seat, the jet alive in her hands. The lead in the enemy formation dipped a wing, a small motion, but enough to break the illusion of perfect resolve. That hesitation rippled down their line, a microsecond of uncertainty Tess could see and feel. The sky between them narrowed with impossible speed. Vapor trailed from their wingtips and her own, curling in the slipstream, the patterns shifting as turbulence reached across the gap. She kept her wings level, the nose perfectly aligned, refusing to acknowledge the dip in their cohesion. The formation began to loosen, the second element drifting fractionally out of position. That was all the proof she needed that they had read her intent. Sunlight hit them at an angle, a burst of brilliance that filled her canopy with white fire. For a heartbeat she flew blind, trusting the vector she had locked moments earlier. The glare strobed through the cockpit as their relative angles shifted, slicing the blinding light into fragments that caught on each canopy and nose cone. It was the purest form of mutual exposure, both sides seen and seeing in the same instant, at the same closing speed. The shockwave hit first as a deep, physical thump in her chest, then as a shudder through the seat. Air compressed and then released in a burst that rattled her harness. Vapor cones exploded along the enemy fuselages, shredding into ragged streamers as they passed through the turbulent air between them. She caught the flash of paint schemes, the mirrored glint of their visors, the tilt of a helmeted head, and then they were gone, ripped away behind her in a fraction of a second. Instinct carried her hand to the stick. She rolled inverted smoothly, pressing herself into the harness as the horizon flipped. Below, the enemy formation had scattered, the loose diamond gone, replaced by 4 separate tracks carving across the sky in diverging arcs. Her own vapor trail hung in the air above them. A straight, unbroken line that cut directly through the point where they had met. She kept the roll going until she was upright again, nose angled toward clear air. No voices filled the radio, only the faint hiss of the open channel. The radar confirmed what her eyes could already see. The enemy was breaking away, their tracks bending back toward their own side of the border. The tone slowed in her headset, the urgency fading with each ping. Her breathing eased for the first time since the intercept began. The adrenaline still pushed at the edges of her awareness, but the tension in her shoulders loosened as the threat dissolved. She glanced over her shoulder, catching one last glimpse of their vapor trails curling downward and away, already starting to fray in the morning air. The shockwave ripples still shimmered in her mind's eye, the physical proof that speed and nerve had been enough to carry the moment. She thought of the wingdip, that small falter that had opened the crack in their formation. It had been all she needed, and she had pressed through without changing course. Sometimes that was all it took. Hold steady when the other side breaks their own line. Her instruments settled into calmer readings, altitude and speed returning to a manageable cruise. The sunlight now washed across the canopy without the fierce glare of the approach, warm instead of blinding. She looked ahead to the open blue, the border behind her secure for now. The victory had come without a shot fired, only the mark of her passage written in white across the sky. Tess adjusted her course toward the direction of the base, the roar of the engines steady but no longer stretched to their limits. The airframe felt smoother, as though the jet itself understood the change from battle posture to return flight. Behind her, the sky held the fading memory of the encounter. Vapor shredded where four had once flown together, and a single, clear trail cutting through it all. Tess leveled out above the clouds, the fighter gliding into a pocket of still air that felt almost weightless after the strain of the intercept. The sky ahead was an unbroken sheet of blue, pure and untouched, stretching so far that it seemed to pull her forward. The engine note settled into a steady hum, no longer stretched to the edge of its capacity, and the vibration in the stick eased under her hand. She eased the throttles back, letting the speed bleed away until the jet felt balanced between motion and calm. Below, the cloud tops rolled in slow waves, their white surface glowing in the full light of morning. Sunlight caught their edges in pale gold, the shadows between them soft and deep. She traced their patterns with her eyes, noting how the lines stretched toward the horizon without a single break. It was a perfect backdrop for the clean marks in the air above. Her own vapor trail still hung in the sky, a single straight line cutting forward from the point of the intercept. It intersected the faint, retreating arcs of the enemy fighters, the patterns crossing like lines drawn in sand before the wind claimed them. The sight carried no noise, no movement, just the quiet record of a contest that had already ended. She took it in for a moment longer before glancing back to her instruments. Ground control's voice came through in a tone stripped of drama, the way all confirmations were meant to be delivered. The enemy formation had turned fully away beyond the border. No further contacts were expected. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was real. Tess acknowledged and logged the mission as a clean deterrence. No engagement. It was the best possible ending for an intercept. The sky kept without the need to fire. Her breathing slowed into an easy rhythm, each exhale clearing out the last traces of adrenaline. She could still feel the echo of the approach in her muscles, the fine-tuned awareness that had kept her aligned at closing speed. But now that precision shifted into something looser, the kind of focus that kept her hands steady on the controls rather than braced for impact. The aircraft felt different too, no longer coiled for performance but content to ride the smoother currents. The rules up here were clear. Hold the line, protect the space, stay until they leave. In that sense, it was far simpler than the world below, where lines were debated and motives tangled. Yet, even here, the reasons behind a border crossing could be as complex as the politics that drew it. Tess did not dwell on them long. Her job was not to interpret the why, but to be certain the line held. The sunlight had lost the blinding edge it carried during the pass. It was warm now, flooding the canopy in a steady glow that softened every surface it touched. The glare no longer forced her eyes away from the horizon. Instead, it made the sky seem more open. The boundary between earth and air, a gentle curve rather than a sharp divide. She adjusted her course toward the base, the heading indicator steady under the small movements of her hand. Ahead, the blue began to deepen as the morning aged, the high air thinning into a sharper clarity. The clouds below thinned in places, revealing glimpses of the land, rivers winding through dark terrain, the pale glint of roads catching the sun. The details felt far away, like another world. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment when the enemy formation began to break. That was the point where the outcome had shifted, when their cohesion had faltered under pressure. It had been her choice to hold steady, to force the pass without a single change in posture. The memory brought no surge of pride, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing the decision had worked. The vapor trails ahead began to fade, the warmth of the sun erasing them stroke by stroke. Soon there would be nothing left in the sky to show what had happened here. That was how it always went. The physical signs gone within minutes. The meaning carried only in those who had been there. Tess let them fade without regret. The result was what mattered. She glanced once more over her shoulder. The place where they had crossed was empty now, the air calm and unmarked. Her own trail still held in the distance, thinning but intact, a reminder that she had been here first and left on her own terms. She turned forward again, the base still far but steady in her mind's map. The mission had been simple on paper, a straightforward intercept. In the air, it had been a contest of nerve and speed, measured in seconds and angles. Now, in the quiet after, it became something else, a reaffirmation of what it meant to own the sky not through force, but through presence and control. Tess settled deeper into her seat, the hum of the engines carrying her home through the clear morning air. Tess rolled the fighter down the taxiway, the canopy open to the cool rush of morning air. The base was fully awake now, a steady rhythm of movement and noise replacing the stillness she had left behind hours earlier. Mechanics worked in tight teams along the flight line, their shouts carrying over the low rumble of idling engines. The scent of fuel and warm metal drifted across the pavement, mingling with the faint tang of oil. She brought the jet to a smooth stop at her stand. The crew chief was already there, waiting with a clipboard in one hand and a sharp eye on the aircraft's skin. He stepped forward as she powered down, scanning the panels and leading edges with practiced precision. No damage. No streaks. Out of place. His inspection ended with a single nod toward her, the kind of wordless acknowledgement that said everything necessary between people who shared the same work. Tess unfastened her harness and stepped down onto the ladder, boots meeting the tarmac with a quiet thud. She paused for a moment beside the nose of the jet, looking upward into the high air. The faint white line of her vapor trail was still there, stretched thin by altitude and wind. A final mark of the morning's work. It would fade soon, but for now it hung over the base like a quiet banner. She crossed to the operations office, the hum of the base following her. Inside, the air was cooler, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights mixing with the steady clack of keyboards. She signed into the logbook with a steady hand, the record short and direct. Intercept, no engagement, formation scattered. The words were plain, but in them lived every detail of the morning. The speed, the sunlight, the moment of decision. Outside again, she walked past rows of aircraft being readied for flights of their own. Pilots moved through checklists, ground crews called out fuel loads and pressure readings. The day's work was already unfolding, the rhythm of the base steady and unbroken. Tess moved through it without drawing attention. Her presence just another part of the flow. At the edge of the flight line, she glanced back once more. The vapor trail was almost gone now, the last thin thread dissolving into the blue. It left nothing behind but the certainty that, for this morning, the sky had been held. Tess turned toward the hangars, the hum of activity settling into the background. The mission was complete. The air was clear, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another day would bring another call. For now, she carried the quiet knowledge that the line had stayed firm under her watch. In the stillness before dawn, Tess rose to meet a challenge that few would ever see, and fewer still would understand. From the first radar ping to the fading line of her vapor trail, she carried the weight of sovereignty with quiet certainty. There was no applause, no grand announcement, only the satisfaction of a job done with precision and restraint. Her story is one of self-worth rooted not in recognition, but in the knowledge that presence and readiness can hold a border as firmly as force. Independence is measured in the moments you stand alone and do not waver. Perhaps you have your own stories of quiet strength. Take a moment to reflect, share your thoughts, or follow for more tales of those who guard the unseen edges of our world.